The African Queen movie review. So this is a classic movie. It's one of those classic movies I really should have seen ages ago, and am somewhat embarrassed to admit that I'm getting around to it so late, but better late than never. If you're not familiar with this movie, it's starring Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, both of which are among my favorite movie stars of all time. Of course, I'm not unique in saying that. They're some of the most beloved movie stars of all time in general by everybody. Yeah, and in this movie, Katharine Hepburn is playing an English missionary in Africa at the beginning of World War I. Now, prior to World War I, just at the outbreak of World War I, Africa was essentially completely colonized by Europe. So when the war breaks out in Europe, it's kind of affecting Africa. And as the Germans are taking over the village in which she's living in and forcing the native Africans into service, Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart must try and escape down the river and get out of the German-occupied part of Africa. Humphrey Bogart is playing a working-class Canadian steamboat pilot. Now, the obvious attraction of this movie is just seeing Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn together, and they do an excellent job. Humphrey Bogart is playing kind of a bumbling working-class character, which is different. I want to say it's against type. Although Humphrey Bogart actually did a lot more movies back in his day than we remember him for. But it's definitely different than we remember him for, right? It's not like the smooth, suave character that you'd picture in Casablanca or The Maltese Falcon or something like that. He's playing like this bumbling character with this fake accent he's got going. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's all right. So it's half an odd couple romance story. Katharine Hepburn is playing like the proper English missionary. Humphrey Bogart is playing like the comic, bumbling, working-class Canadian steamboat pilot. But it's also kind of half an African adventure story. And, nowadays maybe this is a little bit politically incorrect to have like these exotic adventures in Africa. But, this is from the era when they made these movies about exotic adventures in Africa. So, you've got kind of all the usual stuff. As they're going down the African River on the steamboat, they run into rapids, they run into like waterfalls, they have problems with leeches, there's biting bugs, and then of course there's the Germans, right? The German forts are at various points along the river. That being said, it really pales by contrast to today's action films. The action is, it's really just not that great. Even by the standards of the time, I think it was kind of tame. Like if you compare it to some of the Tarzan movies that were kind of around the same time, this movie has a lot less action. What's really great about this movie is just all the gorgeous scenery of Africa. And it struck me as watching this movie that they just don't make these movies anymore. Nowadays, this would have all been CGI. The jungle would have been CGI, the animals would have been CGI. But, this was back in the day, right? Like before CGI. Now, there are some kind of clumsy things where they do kind of superimpose like the boat, that like the background shot and the boat shot is coming from a different film. So there is some kind of camera trickery in that in that sense. But all the scenery that they shoot is real scenery. And it's just gorgeous to look at, and it's a pity that they don't do this in movies anymore. Or I don't know, maybe once in a while they do this in a movie. But yeah, it's just gorgeous to look at, the scenery from the days when movies were actually shot on location and used real nature scenery. Yeah, I think that's all I've got for this. It's a classic film. Definitely check it out.